It's time to start the conversation.
THC Live starts now. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to THC Live. I'm Shane Foxman, and look who's back.
I'm Nikita Graham.
Okay, if you've been watching the show, you know Nikita's been, I don't want to say missing in action the last few weeks, but you've been out on special assignment. Fill the folks in.
I have.
What's different about you now than it was when you left?
What's different is the left finger's now twinkling, and I did some fact-finding missions in Thailand, and I found out Thai people speak Thai. The beaches are beautiful, the water's warm, and there's noodles everywhere.
Okay, that's the very, very informative.
A lot of research.
Very
a lot
informative.
of research.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Very exciting.
Thank you.
We got a busy show tonight. Tell the folks how they can contact us.
Well, you can contact us by going below. There's a bar down below that you can comment and ask questions to our guests. And we're also on YouTube at THC Live Space TV.
Yeah, we got a jam-packed show for you. Some of our usual segments, our news segment, our book club information, also a couple of very interesting guests. Kirk Tousaw is an attorney, a well-known attorney, is going to join us via Skype. He's written and spoken extensively on the issues of drug policy, religious freedoms. He's testified in Ottawa numerous times in front of a variety of standing committees. He's going to join us, so we'll get his thoughts as we get closer and closer to legalization on July 1st. And also very fortunate to have Aaron Bedard as well.
We do, and he is a Canadian war vet. He suffers from PTSD, and he is an advocate for veterans' rights. And he's going to be joining us live in the studio.
Yeah, very excited about that. Before we get to that, though, now last week, you weren't here, but we started talking about, we finished our Growing Pains, our historical segments, and we started talking about just the campaign of the misinformation that was out there. You know, time and time again, governments, Canadian government and the U.S. government commissioned scientific report after report about cannabis and marijuana. And time again, the report would come back saying, you know, we should lift prohibition, all that negativity and all those side effects you're talking about. That isn't really the case. And every time the government kind of buried the report, and then they would put out a PSA, some sort of propaganda. We showed you a great one last week, but apparently you've been hard at work.
We have more for you this week. And this one, I think it just gets kind of funnier and funnier as time goes on.
I think so.
Let's check out this week's public service announcement.
It's stimulating, mind expanding, safer to use than alcohol. It's the in thing, the hula hoop of the jet generation, and as much a part of growing up as smoking corn silk behind the back fence. Such are the myths concerning marijuana. Myths that lull thousands of young people into experimenting with a noxious weed. The facts are otherwise. Marijuana is an intoxicating, mind-muddling drug. Its use can lead to abnormal behavior, to psychological dependence, and to abuse of other drugs. The human brain, after all, is made for thinking, not fumigating. It's hardly a tinker toy for experimenting with drugs. This has been the public service message of the American Medical Association and your local station.
Hey, Lindsay. I wish you didn't smoke weed. You're not the same when you smoke. And I miss my friend. I'll be outside.
You know what? We showed the one a couple weeks ago. Remember, this is your brain on drugs. And we used to say, when we used to see that when we were kids, if that's someone that actually smokes, all they're thinking is, I'm hungry.
Yeah.
And that one, if
the
you
dog
smoke
should be a little more
you're
well-fed, too.
You're thinking the dog's talking to you. It's amazing that that's what they came up with. Those were their best public service
Yeah.
announcements. This is what will get the message out, even though the message was totally wrong.
And she's so like sad
And look,
too.
I'm not
It's
saying
just-
that she's
oh my
15 and
gosh.
she should be smoking pot. That's not the point. Let's go beyond that and just look at the message. The kid could have been 21 years old and having their dog talk to them. It wouldn't have.
If your
wouldn't
dog's
matter.
talking to you, you have bigger problems, I think, than smoking.
Or it's awesome. Or it's
Or yeah, you're
awesome.
having a really, really good afternoon.
It's time to bring in our first guest.
We do joining us live on Skype, we have lawyer Kirk Tousaw.
Yeah, founding board member of Sensible BC Society, serves on the board of directors of Normal Canada and the BC Civil Liberties Association. As I mentioned off the top, Kirk's testified in Ottawa in front of numerous standing committees. Kirk, thanks very much for doing this. We appreciate it.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
No, and let me just ask you first off, just because it's interesting that so much of your practice now it focuses on cannabis and the upcoming legalization and everything that kind of goes around it. How did you get involved in the first place? Was that something you thought about in law school, or did you just kind of stumble into it?
Well, I've been a fan of the plant all of my adult life, and it's been, sort of a constant companion to me, which resulted in, some situations involving the criminal justice system, and sort of that propelled me into some activism and advocacy. I didn't plan on necessarily going in this direction when I went to law school. I sort of went to law school because I had a political philosophy degree and wasn't really sure I wanted to continue and go on and teach or do something like that. I went to law school, did a few years of civil practice in a big firm, some criminal law as well, because that's what I was really interested in. And then family decided to sort of escape the United States in 2002. I'm a dual citizen, so we moved to Vancouver. I got involved with the BC Civil Liberties Association, went back to UBC, and got a master's in law. And there I did write about cannabis prohibition. So I wrote a thesis on the Senate report, and at the time the Supreme Court of Canada had just decided the Malma Levine case, along with Randy Kane and Chris Clay. As an aside, I've now represented all three of those people over the years, and that's been a real privilege. But I wrote my thesis about that case and the criminalization of cannabis here in Canada. Fell in with John Conroy and Mark Emery and the folks at Cannabis Culture Headquarters. Went to work for the BC Marijuana Party while being admitted to practice law in BC. And in fact, I had wrapped up the provincial election campaign in 2005 for the BC Marijuana Party, and had done my sort of law review course that summer. And the day I took my bar exam, July 25, 2005, sort of, you have your cell phones off, you're in taking this exam all day. And I walked out with my law school compatriots ready to go celebrate, and turned on my cell phone. And my cell phone was just blowing up. I was getting calls from every media outlet, and I answer one, and it's the CBC, and they want to comment from the BC Marijuana Party on the Drug Enforcement Administration raids at its headquarters and the arrests of Mark Emery and Greg Williams and Michelle Rainey. And I sort of, said, well, I'll have to call you back.
Yeah, I would think
I have
so.
a different call to make first, yeah.
Handed off my goodie bag to my buddy and said, go out to the bar, have a good time. I've got to go and sort of get to work. And that was the day they arrested Mark and Greg and Michelle, and it's just sort of been nonstop ever since.
Wow.
When you think about that and the times at the beginning, to where we are now on the the eve, I guess you could say, of July 1st and legalization in Canada, it seemed for the longest time it was a non-starter, and it seemed mostly because of concern about our neighbors to the south. But once you saw the first crack, and the first state, whether it was Colorado or whether it was Washington, I can't remember. But that seemed to change the conversation completely. Are you surprised, considering the career-long fight you've been in as far as advocacy goes, that we're this close to legalization?
Part of me wants to say yes, and part of me wants to say no to that question. People forget, but it was only 5 years ago, in 2012, when law reform on the cannabis file was in front of the Parliament, but it was to implement mandatory jail terms for producing as few as 6 plants, lengthy jail terms for producing more than that on a mandatory basis, all kinds of repressive legislation. I mean, things were pretty grim. And, if you'd asked me in 2012, would we be talking about legalizing cannabis in 5 short years, I think I would have laughed at you. I'd say we're still going to be fighting the battles in court arising from this terrible piece of legislation that the Harper government's implemented. So in that sense, I'm kind of gobsmacked. On the other hand, the public has been ahead of politicians on this issue for more than a decade. A majority of Canadians have supported legalization for a very long time. It's been studied to death here in Canada by royal commissions from Ledane in the 70s to the Senate report in 2002, and a parallel but briefer report done in the House right around the same time. And everybody that's ever looked at this and paid any attention to the evidence says we should be legalizing cannabis. So, I'm an optimist. I like to think that facts do matter from time to time, even in government, and that good public policy sometimes prevails over politics. So I'm very happy that we're on the brink of legalization. There's work yet to be done. Like any evolutionary process, the evolution of how we're going to go about dealing with cannabis going forward is it doesn't stop July 1, 2018. I've heard it called Prohibition 2.0, and I understand where that perspective comes from. I like to think of it as legalization 1.0, and it's a step that we can take now and then continue to take more steps towards the system that I think all Canadians would benefit from.
So you're a part of, you've kind of been in the Senate, I guess, right? And sitting and being a part of the bill that's happening right now. Can you tell us your thoughts on where it's going and how it's where it's at right now in the state of it?
Yeah, so as you know, the Bill C45 has passed third reading, so it's gone over to the Senate for consideration. So in our parliamentary system, the Senate will do its deliberations on it, and will either make amendments to it or not, and then send it back to the House for royal assent, basically, and then passing in the law. Some have speculated the Senate may hold that up. I don't think they will. I think the will of Canadians is pretty clear on this. I think the legislation, there are places it needs to be amended, for sure. I think that, for example, on the personal side of things, the idea that you're a criminal for growing 5 plants and not 4, or you're a criminal if you live in a house of 4 adults and you each grow 4 plants, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's arbitrary and quite likely to be unconstitutional. I think having a 30-gram limit when you can fill up your trunk with enough alcohol to kill a small town doesn't make any sense at all. We shouldn't be treating cannabis more strictly than we treat alcohol. Let's treat it at least as leniently as we treat alcohol, and actually probably more leniently because it's way safer. So those are places we need to do some work. Certainly the per se alcohol limits that are in Bill C46 and some of the provincial legislation are completely unconstitutional, will be challenged on day one, deeply discriminate against medical consumers. And of course, we shouldn't be taxing medicine at all. In fact, we should be covering those costs for Canadians that use it for, as your next guest, I'm sure we'll talk about, post-traumatic stress disorder and other serious chronic or acute health conditions. But, at the end of the day, we are going to legalize cannabis. You're going to be able to, ordinary Canadians are going to be able to go into stores and buy it, possess it, and in a year from then, hash and edibles will be on the shelves. It's a momentous step forward, and we should be justifiably proud that as Canadians we are taking this step. And it looks like the future is going to be better than the past. That's for sure.
Now, do you think because I guess the two main things are keeping the black market out of things and also keeping it out of the hands of children. Do you think by the rules that they're putting in place right now that, like the restriction of provinces and things like that, do you think that's going to actually kind of bring the black market back into play?
I think the black market or the gray market of dispensaries will go away over time as the legal market begins to be able to compete on price, on customer service, on quality, and on variety of products. And that's going to be the big sticking point. I mean, when you only have flower and sort of low potency cannabis oil available on day one legally, people that like concentrates, people that like vape pens, people that like edibles or drinkables, are left out. Those products can only exist in the black market, and people are going to go there and get them. And I think the government's recognized that. I mean, it's actually, if you look at the most recent consultation document that all Canadians should read and comment on before January 20. That's the deadline. Have your say, please. Let the government know your preferences, either as growers or consumers or distributors or industry participants or parents or whatever the case may be. Have your say. That's what democracy is. But if you look at that document, it very explicitly recognizes that the illicit industry has to compete with a very vibrant, thriving, and well-run, frankly, illicit industry, most of which is not organized crime domestically, most of which is ordinary Canadians, small business people and entrepreneurs just growing and making great products and getting it in the hands of people that really, really want it. But over time, the goal, I think, should be to transition those people out of the illicit industry, bring them out of the shadows, bring them into the light, make it easy for them to participate legally. The provinces that have enacted really restrictive rules on retail, the monopolies on retail that you're seeing in Ontario and Quebec in particular, which are frankly outliers at this point in what we know about what the provinces are going to do, that's not going to work very well. That's not what people want. That's not what people are accustomed to. That's not how you transition the industry. If you're going to try to compete against the black market, you're not going to do very well, at least in the short term. And I think we need to be a little more open to welcoming in the people that are doing this job really, really well right now, and bringing them, as I say, out of the shadows. That should be the goal.
Kirk, you mentioned just every province is kind of enact their own rules depending on how they see things, and it seems so far a lot of them are just following what they do with the Liquor Control Board in their province. Right. It's strange just because it's going to be different rules in different parts of the country, and I'm wondering, there's a case right now that I guess the Supreme Court's going to decide on dealing with moving alcohol between provinces, where a gentleman, and again, bought his alcohol, I believe, in Quebec and took it back to New Brunswick, and all of a sudden he's going, no, there's a limit on how much you can bring. It's within the country. Will that case have any effect, do you think, on people buying mail-order cannabis and things from across the country?
Well, I certainly hope it will. I am acting on behalf of Cannabis Culture, which itself is representing a group of 27 other dispensaries that filed for intervention in that case, and we were granted intervention by the Supreme Court of Canada. And so we'll be making arguments next week, actually, on December 7th. The case is on December 6th and 7th. You can watch it on the internet if people are interested. It's the Comeau case, Comeau. And you're right, the facts involve Mr. Comeau, who crossed the bridge in his hometown and went and purchased some alcohol over in Quebec where it was a bit cheaper. He brought back more than the 12 bottles of beer he was entitled to. I think he had 48. And it was all for his own personal consumption. And the police were doing a sting operation on the bridge, pulling people over and handing out tickets. And he has managed to bring that case from the very lowest rung of the court system in our country, the initial lower level trial court, all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, which will decide whether Section 121 of the Canadian Constitution, which prohibits interprovincial trade barriers, or appears to, is implicated by that kind of law. And what we've argued on behalf of Cannabis Culture and the other interveners, the other dispensaries, is that, look, these provincial monopolies, these ways of doing things that restrict, for example, someone in Ontario to purchase only from Ontario stores, and you can't, for example, think about it. You could cross the border over to Quebec, where the consumption age will be a year younger. Of course, that happens now for alcohol. And if you bring it back, then you run into trouble. We think these kinds of trade barriers within the provinces and between the provinces don't make a lot of sense. And ultimately, all the interveners that have come in on Mr. Comeau's side, the craft wine, the craft beer associations, have said, look, these rules stifle our industry, and they stifle the ability of Canadians to have the broadest range of selection possible of goods that are legal and permissible for them to purchase. And certainly that should apply to cannabis as well.
No, a lot of eyes will be on that case. Any questions from our viewers for Kirk?
We do have some questions. One is from Christian in Thunder Bay. And he asks, I've heard that Kirk is booked solid with clients. Where can I find a cannabis lawyer to help me become a licensed producer?
Well, Christian, thanks very much. That's very kind of you. I don't do, frankly, even that kind of work. I have not been involved at all directly in licensed producer applications. It's kind of regulatory compliance stuff that has never been something I've been particularly interested in. And so I think there are good teams out there. There are, I think your first stop might not be a lawyer. It might be one of the organizations that consult with prospective LPs. David Hyde's a guy that I interact with on Twitter a lot, and he's got a team that assists. There's Cannabis Compliance Incorporated, I think, is out there. So there's a fair bit of resources providing assistance to people that want to go that route. And certainly with the advent now of micro producers coming and micro processors, nurseries, research applications, a broader range of things you can apply for licenses are coming. That's part of the consultation document. I think this will be more and more navigable for ordinary Canadians, and certainly that's the way it should be.
I have a hunch more and more people will get into the business of providing consulting services once everything is kind of above board.
Sure.
We do have one more question.
One more, okay, sure.
Leslie in Red Deer asks, how accessible do you think the recently announced micro license will be for craft growers and entrepreneurs? She's concerned that the financial and security requirements could prohibit fair participation.
Yeah, and I think Leslie echoes concerns that a lot of people have been voicing, and that's part of why the government's doing this consultation. I mean, I think the good thing is that if you read the consultation document, the government, picking up on suggestions from the task force, has said, look, in order to have the vibrant industry that will assist in transitioning people away from the illicit market, we need to have the ability of Canadians and small business to participate. And that's the intent in creating these licensing categories. The devil will be in the details, absolutely. That's why it's important for people to have their say. But I do think it will be accessible. Now, it's gonna take, like all things do, all regulated industries do, it's gonna take some money, it's gonna take some capital, it's gonna take some hard work. And whether that acts as a barrier to keep many people out is going to be anybody's guess. I certainly hope not. I don't think it should cost a lot of money to have a small cannabis farm. And I think the provinces can help that out by making sure that within their own retail regulatory schemes, they're allowing these craft producers to sell direct to the consumer, like you would in a vineyard or in a craft brew location. So down the street from my house here in the Cowichan Valley, British Columbia, I can go to a vineyard, I can sample their wine, I can buy wine directly from that vintner and take it home. I can go to my local craft brewery, Red Arrow in Duncan, I can have a sampler on site, I can sit on their porch in the summer and have a beer, and I can buy it directly from them in keg, in bottle and can format, and I can take it right home. If that exists provincially for craft cannabis, I think it makes participation so much easier for small business, because you don't need to produce so much that you interest the big provincial monopolies in purchasing from you. And that's, I think, part of the lobbying that has to go on over the next year. And after that, like I say, this is a process. We're 100 years at the end of alcohol prohibition, and people are still fighting against silly alcohol rules, as we'll be doing in the Supreme Court of Canada next week. So I'm optimistic, but Leslie's right. Work remains to be done, and those are real issues.
Kirk, listen, we're out of time. We really appreciate you spending some of your afternoon with us. We appreciate it tremendously.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks very much, and anytime. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
You.
That's Kirk Tousaw again. It's the Tousaw Law Corporation. Aaron Bedard, Canadian war veteran, is going to join us coming up in just a few minutes. First, though, let's take a look at this week's book club.
It is now time for some news. I heard Shane's been
This is our news segment.
here.
We find out some interesting information. You heard Kirk talking about it too. Bill C45 has been passed. It's now waiting to be kind of signed off on by the Senate. And that kind of now throws the ball into the courts of all the provinces. What are they going to do as far as what are the rules going to be? You know, BC, we talked about it a couple of months ago. They had their information line set up. They wanted to hear from BC residents. So now we can run down and give you a sense of what some of the provinces are doing so far. We've got an update. So as far as our home base here in British Columbia,
very lenient, I would say, kind of one of the most.
Well, so far we haven't announced the regulations yet. It's expected that they will adopt a hybrid model that will allow some private cannabis retailers alongside some government-run dispensaries, kind of the same way that they handle alcohol sales, which you notice is going to be a theme. It seems that whatever the province does with alcohol, it seems like that's what they want to do for marijuana. Alberta plans to sell recreational marijuana at privately operated stores that will be overseen by the Gaming and Liquor Commission. The province will control online sales through a government website. The legal age will be 18. The same age as alcohol in Alberta. Saskatchewan expected to release their regulations sometime during the winter months, so just after the new year. Manitoba will sell recreational marijuana at privately owned dispensaries overseen by the Manitoba Liquor and Lottery Corporation. They haven't decided on a legal age yet in Manitoba. We all know what's going on in Ontario. They plan to open 40 provincially operated cannabis stores next year, 40 in the entire province. It'll grow to 150 Crown outlets by 2020. They have no plans whatsoever to allow private dispensaries. The legal age will be set at 19. It's really surprising.
It's surprising the amount of dispensaries that are already in
Ontario, and they're going to just shut them all down. Quebec, the legal age will be set at 18. The provincially owned Crown Corporation will be overseen by the Quebec Liquor Control Board. Let's see. There will be no. They're also. Look, Quebec's going to prohibit home cultivation as well.
Yeah.
So only
the only province that's going to be
doing that. New Brunswick plans to sell recreational marijuana in provincially owned retailers overseen by the Liquor Board. You'll have to be 19. Nova Scotia will release their information by the end of the month, or the end of December, I should say. PEI plans to review input from the public and local stakeholders while developing regulations over the winter time. I guess they'll wait and see what everybody else is doing. Finally, Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada's easternmost provinces, plan to license private retailers that will be regulated by the Newfoundland and Labrador Liquor Control Board. Legal age will be 19. So it just seems that it's either one way or the other. It's either all government run or they're having a hybrid where they're allowing some private sellers too. That's what you get the sense is what's going to happen here in BC.
Yeah.
Which only makes sense. There's so many people already doing a fairly good job, I would say.
And that's the whole thing, is they are doing a good job, and they know about the product
They're paying
already.
their taxes. They're doing everything they're supposed to do.
And I think if I were to go to one of the stores, I'd want to go someplace that I feel a little more comfortable going to and knowing that they know what they're talking about as well.
And here, this is also from BC. So the BC liquor stores and the private liquor stores, they want to be the ones in BC that are selling cannabis and marijuana. This is one of their arguments, and this is my favorite.
It's a good one.
And I apologize if I'm pronouncing his name wrong. Jeff Gennard is the executive director of the Private Liquor Store Industry Association, ABLE BC. This is what he says. This is one of the reasons he thinks liquor stores are better equipped to handle the selling of cannabis. The fact that liquor store employees are already trained to ID people.
Everybody can ID somebody. If you're a waitress.
Can I see your license? Apparently I'm trained as well. Can I see some ID, sir? I'm just stunned that is the argument with a straight face. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it sold in liquor stores. So I can buy my my king can of beer and my dime bag as I walk out and hop into my car.
It's also, you shouldn't be mixing the two of them. Those are probably the two things you should be keeping separate, if anything, right?
Yeah, I
sell
find
at
it
Burger
unbelievable.
King at least. That would be a better,
At a drive-through?
Yeah, at a drive-through, right? Then you can have a snack at the same time. It makes a little more sense.
That's your suggestion. Kirk Tousaw alluded to this during our conversation. This is the Gerard Comeau case. So it started back in 2012, and you heard he heads over to Quebec to buy some bottles of beer, comes back over the bridge into New Brunswick, gets stopped by the police. Oh, you've got too many bottles of beer, gets a ticket, because you're not allowed to bring back more than a certain amount, even though he's within Canada and bought the liquor in Canada. I had no idea there was even rules between the provinces whatsoever. Talk about archaic, and you heard Kirk talk about what it could mean. Depending on how the Supreme Court rules, what it could mean for cannabis sales across the country too. That mail order business is a pretty big business, especially if you're going to live in a province that only offers some products. Then parts of the country are offering different products. You can buy them online. I don't know how the government.
And some places too. If you kind of live in the boonies, it's not that convenient to just drive. You can't drive down the street to a store, so you're going to have to order online as well. And
even in Ontario, you think of how big Ontario is. They're going to have 40 stores the first year. 40 stores in the entire province. You could have 40 stores in Toronto.
I think we have 40 stores on one street.
Yeah,
some places in Vancouver.
It's crazy. And here, this I'm sure has regulators overly concerned. We got a picture of this. The hottest gift for Christmas as we lead up to the holidays. Yeah, it's the Cannabis Christmas Advent calendar. They can't even keep them in stock.
They're flying off the shelves.
Lori Felder of Coast to Coast Medicinals says she's been overwhelmed by the response since launching the holiday calendars earlier this month. We just wanted something fun and different for adults. The company, which is unlicensed, has sold 150 calendars with 300 more orders ready for processing, on top of a waiting list of another 1,500 people. Last week, of course, Health Canada unveiled a set of proposed regulations that would, among other things, limit colors graphics that are on cannabis packages and require stark health warnings like those found on tobacco products. I have a hunch the Advent calendar doesn't maybe meet all those regulations. We'll have to wait and see. I have a hunch
that maybe there'll be a few more orders after the show as well.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Time to welcome our next guest joining us live in studio, Aaron Bedard, Canadian veteran, represented Canada, I don't know if represented is the right word, but was in Afghanistan with the Canadian military, suffers from PTSD, uses cannabis, an advocate for veterans' rights. Lots of stuff to talk to you about. We appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Just first off, for those who are fortunate enough not to be in the military and be into a situation that you were in, give us a sense of when were you in Afghanistan?
Well, I served from 2002 to 2010, and I was in the first combat tour in 2006 when we moved our operations into Kandahar, and went through a 6-month tour. Tours are usually 6 to 9 months, and it was technically the first time we were in combat operations with the same rules of engagement since Korea 50 years before, so it was quite an adventure.
Adventure is an interesting word to use. That gives a certain sense of it, maybe romanticized a little bit. Adventure, we talked about this before, and I'll ask you again. Is it possible to go over there and experience what you did and not come back suffering from PTSD?
Well, everybody in life goes through stress. We all have ways of managing it. Some do it well, some don't. Some have a very little tolerance to stress. And in the military, we're trained to learn to manage it. And going over there, it's like going to the Olympics of dealing with stress. And combat arms, the people that go outside the wire, they have the ultimate challenge. And even if you are near the breaking point, you still have a job to finish. And you have to push it down, keep breathing, keep your heart rate down, and get through it, because you don't want to hurt the person next to you. You don't want to let anybody down. You want to become a liability out there when things are on.
Can you describe what it's like to actually have PTSD and how you've kind of been
Do you know you have it?
Is it something you come back and...
I came back home here at Pitt Meadows, just local to my mom, and right away she could see that there was something right. And with summer months there in 2006, barely sleeping at all, and we were getting put onto another operation, onto another, in the driver's seat in my labs there, like just leaning against the engine compartment while it's running there and catching a little bit of Z's, and then it'd come over the radio, okay, let's go again. You get up, and so little naps here and there. So it, couple months of that sustained, it's not healthy. And I was drinking Red Bulls one after another to keep up, and caffeine, so wherever I could get it, caffeine gums we were getting, and it definitely has some wear on your body. Your adrenals get exhausted, and you're worn right down to zero by the end.
Do you realize that when it's happening to you?
You don't have time to realize that. You got to do your job. We got to push that all down, and we see people right next to us, people we served with, that get killed, and you got to keep going, and you got to push it down. Like I turned into a pretty cold-hearted soldier there through those summer months because I had to.
Just
I had
to
to
survive.
protect myself, and I had to protect the people next to me. We had to get the job done.
So when you come home and you realize that something's off, or I'm not,
sleep's off.
yeah, I'm not,
dreams are bad.
right. What's your first step? What do you do?
Dogs barking behind me at my mom's, and it's like a shotgun going off, and
Right.
there's all these triggers, and you don't understand it. And you, as a soldier, we know that if we start displaying issues at work, or if we come forward and say that we need to seek treatment, 99% of the time we're not going to make it back to the unit. That's going to be the end of your career as soon as you put your hand up. The Canadian Armed Forces are working very hard now to make that not the case, not the appearance, the optics, in order to make people comfortable coming forward. But it's very hard. When you got it, you got it. So there's hundreds, if not thousands, of soldiers off the back of Afghanistan that are just trying to keep with the job. And are you aware of it? No. I mean, you have a bunch of drinks, the average person, and you still think you're okay and you can get through the night okay.
Right.
Some people think it's okay, they'll get behind the wheel of their car, and you're not always self-aware. And it was only at the point where a year later I really started to melt down. I was on a training exercise, and our vehicle actually got hit by lightning. And when you are right at the point of contact to get hit by lightning, it's a kaboom instantly.
Yes.
It was like an IED. And that was 3-4 months before I finally had to leave the unit. It really triggered me, and that was the start of a downturn. I started self-medicating, drinking heavily to try and push this down, to try and kill the anxiety, and I was starting to build up in rage, and it was just, and then it got to this breaking point where I had to leave the unit, and it was a really hard go. Right away they started pushing pharmaceuticals on me,
Right.
and they were actually making it worse.
Really?
Well, I was very broken,
Right.
and I was only getting a 1 hour visit once a week. And like when you get your car broken down, you want to be at work on Monday
Right.
to go to the mechanic. You imagine the mechanic calls you and says, "Yeah, we can fix it, but we're only going to work on it 1 hour a week."
Right.
It's no, you need something up front, and I didn't have that. So you're forced to try and figure it out on your own. A lot of it, 99% of it, because that's only 1 hour a week out of how many hours a week. So. And so a lot of your ideas about coping, such as self-medicating and just your behavior, the way you decide you're going to react when someone cuts you off, and dozens of other triggers outside in the everyday life there, can really continue you down a downward spiral as far as your self-confidence and how you behave. You can scare away your family, your kids. It's tough.
What kind of options do they give you when you're back home? Like, is it just straight to medication? Like,
That's
here's
the
your
go-to.
fix, right?
The go-to is pharmaceuticals.
Wow.
Yeah.
And since then, so you've kind of,
Where was the turn?
yeah, when
Well, by
did you decide?
2008, I was at the point where I was going to take my life. I
Right.
just couldn't take it anymore. And my mom flew up and went and saw that doctor and told her no more meds. Within 5 minutes, she said, "Oh, well, just try one more." And my
Right.
mom went like that, and we got out of there. And we went to the pharmacist, and right away she said, "I want to see the exact list of everything he's been on." And she was a pharmacy assistant at the time.
Right.
And she established that there are 3 different periods where I had a moment where I punched a hole through a wall, and a couple other moments there where I rage out of control type of thing. And she asked the pharmacist, like, "These are all high in serotonin, right?" And he said, "Yeah." And my mom, just looking at that list instantly, could see a correlation of that the doctors did not see that were providing these
Right,
drugs.
it's- it's
And
ridiculous.
it's like one after the other, right? Like,
Yeah.
So how do you end up trying marijuana or cannabis? How does
So
that
that
happen?
was 2008-9. I got released 2010. I went through the Veterans Transition Program in 2011, which is a peer group of 8-10 soldiers for 10 days to start to get a square one, a foundation, a plan for a few years going forward, and to realize you're not alone and that these triggers are all very similar and they come from a lot of the same things. It's all very similar. And then it wasn't until 2014 in the summer there, a friend of mine, a fellow veteran, his wife gave me a bottle of cannabinoid oil, which doesn't have THC in it.
Right,
It's
CBD,
just something
yeah.
that relaxes your nervous system. She said, I didn't like this. This was for anxiety for me, and I don't like it, so try it. And so I brought it home, and I did it for a couple of days, and I didn't think anything was happening, but my wife, it's again, like I said earlier, people on the outside will see the
Notice,
differences.
yeah.
My wife's like, this is, you know, you think there's nothing happening, but you've been happy for days. Your sense of humor came back, and you're not getting angry at all, and you're very relaxed. Like, I like you like this, right? And at that time, my wife, we had a code word, Tahiti, which meant time out if we started getting each other going, because it would just spiral and it would get mad, and people would raise voices, and so it quickly went from that to, instead of Tahiti, to go have a puff. Within a year. Me and her had to go through a bit of counseling together, and she had to do a lot of the hard work there. We had to work together to come up with a plan to manage it and an understanding. She, going through the process, understood where these things come from, the anger, and we had to do a lot of hard work. There's a lot of foundational work you have to do to get through this, to get through the dark hole part and come out the light at the end of the tunnel. For me, it was 8 years. If I had cannabinoid oil from day one, the moment I started getting it, it seems to relax your nervous system. I can come sit here right now, I'm on cannabinoid oil right now. I take it first thing in the morning, and it helps just stabilize me, and I start off my day well. And I don't have a lot of anxiety that I would have had. 2012-13, being part of a lawsuit against the government of Canada, we went to Ottawa for my very first time, and immediately we went right into Parliament and went right into the press gallery to do a statement calling out my government that I served. And I'll tell you what, I was horrified, right? Sure. And now here I am. That was before cannabinoid oil, and then now here just November 8th of this year, just before Remembrance Day, we went and did one. And it was a complete night and day experience for me. I was able to be in there and just, like I did in war, push that stuff down, and just, I got through it, and it's a game changer.
So when you realize that and the light goes off for you, does that become you going, okay, there's other guys that are in the same boat as me? Is that how is that how you get involved in advocacy, or how does it work for you?
Well, I had a very difficult transition. They'd lost my file a number of times, and they love to say to all of us, oh, you slipped through the cracks. You know, the people that handle the administrative ends of your process to leaving the forces love saying, oh, you fell through the cracks, whoops. And it really angered me. And in 2011, I found out about a suicide, a family there that weren't treated well by the Canadian Armed Forces, wanting to know more about what happened to their son. And they were covering it up. And it enraged me enough that I took the unusual step to go on social media, and I was very paranoid about doing that. And I started finding out about all these systemic problems across the board, dealing with Veteran Affairs Canada and Department of National Defence with their transition process. And I quickly got connected to a lawsuit called the Equitas case, and I became one of the 6 lead plaintiffs on it. There's 6 of us Afghanistan veterans on there. And for 5 years now, it's been 5 years and about 30 days since we filed, and it's a case that's dragged on and on and on. Lawsuits against governments can go on for a decade or more. And we just went through an election where I thought they promised to stop fighting us in court, and yet 6 months after the election, they took us right back to court and kept going with it. You know, myself and my other key plaintiff that we worked closely together, Major Mark Campbell, you know, we had to sit down for a few days right at that period and really dig in and make a commitment and decide that we have to look at this, that we might go on for another 5-10 years.
Yeah, long haul, right.
And so something like cannabinoid oil, I wouldn't have been able to do it without it. I wouldn't have been able to go to Ottawa and advocate and meet with MPs and senators and all these government officials. My heart rate, I'd damn near have a heart attack to try and do it.
Now, what about so obviously you have friends who are veterans as well.
Oh,
have
thousands.
you seen, so in that process, since you guys have been using cannabis to help heal, what are some of the things that have helped other people? Because it's helping you with calming, but what is it doing in other people's lives?
Well, my friend Major Campbell there, he got his legs blown off in an IED ambush. They kicked off an ambush by detonating something right under him. And so legs just shredded, and I won't get into details, sorry folks. And then another dozen injuries throughout his body. He was on about 36 pills a day. Wow. And he, in 2011-12, his liver was just going downhill really quick with all that. It's incredibly toxic stuff, all this stuff he was taking. So he was one of the first people that were active duty D&D who got approved to use medicinal marijuana. And his max he can do is 5 grams a day, use vaporizing. And he can't take the edibles because the way his body works now, it wouldn't start to work naturally. It might take 24 hours and suddenly hit him all at once, and you have a bad reaction. He'd tried it, and so he has to vaporize it in his condition because he's got very complex injuries. So he's a 5 gram a day person. There are people out there that have to use edibles and up to 10 grams a day for combinations of traumatic brain injury and the physical injuries from the explosions, plus PTSD. And you'll know that there's sativas, indicas, and hybrids, and it's very complex. And the education piece in this, it really has to catch up to it because
is that as we get closer to July 1st? Is that one of the things that that you're concerned about?
That is the number one most important thing with this going legal, especially for the young folks out there, because life's complex enough, and something that can just take you off in another direction if you're using it to have fun. It's not necessarily a toy in my mind. Like for me, I can't take one of the strong, high-level THCs because I'll have a panic attack. Last year, I'm calling up my mom, I'm freaking out. And so that was the last time I touched that one, right?
So you're sticking, but it's interesting though.
And it can scare someone off of using it at all when you have a bad reaction like that. And really, the young folks there, it needs to be looked at. And I'd say everybody out there, I mean, my family all around me, they see it, they see the benefits with me, and they want to be able to use it just for stress. As they see, you take that in the morning, you just take a little vial of the cannabinoid oil, and it keeps your body all calm. And me, I want to kill my boss. And like my mom's just like, oh, well, she's near retirement, and she's now in a stress, sort of natural, constant state of stress in her lifestyle. That
as she gets closer to the
needs
unknown,
to find something like that just calms the nervous system down. It's a great medicine in that form.
Well, you know what, I've heard many people say that it's always medicinal. Because of this, again, it's whether it's the stress, just the calming feeling, and whether it's got THC or not, and again, depends now, there's so much strength. But just in the general sense, it's always for that reason. You're just back, from what I understand, you were across Canada talking to folks.
Because they wanted to take us back to court, I had to ramp up. I started doing this thing called Veteran Guerrilla Radio Live on Facebook in order to get more comfortable with speaking and presenting and using my hands.
You seem solid, my friend.
Awesome,
it's a year and a half later now. I'm starting to get comfortable with it. That was a big push for that. And then the next thing was to start a movement leading up to the next election, because we aren't seeing enough traction and quick movement that we need to see on the vet file and the return of the pension for life option that was taken away with the new Veterans Charter in 2006, which replaced it with a lump sum approach and a very bureaucratic, complex, insurance-modeled approach, which is deny, and you gotta fight for it. And so here with this cross-Canada trip that I just did, we're doing a walk for veterans in every single province, as many as possible this next year, at least about 6 of them. And it's to create outreach to the general public, to help educate them, and also for the veterans to be able to have an event where it's not Remembrance Day, where the days get darker and shorter and you're leading into the dark time of year. And there's a lot of people can get into a state of depression in that time of year. And I'm not dissuading anyone from going to Remembrance Day, but I've always wanted to see something where in the spring, when the flowers open, veterans open up about their plans for their summer, and to start off on June 3rd, this coming 2018, to go for a walk with the general public, strap some medals on and be comfortable with the general public being able to walk with them for 5Ks and be able to ask them questions about their service. You mean if someone's got a teenage kid that wants to join, they can ask some questions, and it can be a very positive kumbaya.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. We'll see if there's any questions from our viewers, but it's interesting, some guys, like here, you're able to talk about your experiences. I've come across veterans over the years, and again, they don't want any part. They don't want to talk about it.
They're not ready.
Right.
A lot of people, the wounds are still very fresh, and they haven't been managed well, and they don't have that square one yet.
Right. Because that seems to be, because nothing is more impactful, I found, whether it's, no matter how old, say, the kids are, when a veteran comes into the classroom, and he's able to actually talk about things, it's amazing, as I've seen kids' faces, just because it's not fake, it's not a movie, it's not TV. No, this guy's telling you about real life. And there's something about that you can pick up on that when someone's telling you their experience.
Yeah.
You can feel it's real and it's not, and it's just something. So, yeah, I guess you're right. The more of you guys that can, I guess, get the foundation that can share, the better it's going to be, I would think.
Finding that peace within yourself, right?
Yeah.
That you can get out there and.
Yeah, that's one of the number one things that I've learned from an individual that wasn't a doctor, was a member of the Vancouver Police Department of 35 years, a former detective that told me his son came back from Afghanistan, got hit by a claymore, almost got killed, and his son, of course, had some stressors and some triggers out of that, and he told his son, and he told me too, to keep telling the hardest stories, the stories that make you cry, keep telling them until you don't. You got to get it out.
Yeah.
Because a lot of men, the male ego is our worst enemy in a lot of cases with this sort of stuff.
Well,
that we just want to hold it in, like you hold on to a firecracker and then.
Yeah.
You told me just when you first got over to Afghanistan and you were injured right off the bat and you didn't want to say anything because you didn't want to come out.
Yeah.
You just
it's the same thing, right? It's you hear football players get the concussion, but they don't, or the hockey player, they don't tell that their bell was rung because they don't want to come out. They don't want to.
It's the masculine thing too, and especially being a veteran, that is as masculine as you can get in the sense of.
Yeah, but outside of the physical, I'm talking about the mental here.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Men think it's some kind of feminine thing to be able to talk about your feelings.
Yeah.
And the fact that with PTSD, we have not very good control. When you first get to that point, or you get to the breaking point, our emotions are all over the place. And unfortunately, then we choose to go always to anger.
Right.
And like so many men do, it's a big problem. Men need to learn to be able to talk about their feelings and do it amongst men. Like with me, I have a couple groups of vets that I talk to here local and over on the island, and we get together as much as we can. And we have a check-in for 10 minutes, and we have a beer or two at somewhere behind closed doors, and check in with each other. And when you have suddenly 300 years of experience in a room, you get a couple old vets that are like twice our age that went down those roads and had to learn to cope and manage these things. And then next thing you know, you're getting some strategies from people, and then you're growing, and it's getting out, and you feel you're not alone, and then you're starting to get some closure.
Wow.
But we're not there yet.
No,
there's a long way to go.
It is a long way, yeah.
Do we have?
We do have Facebook questions here. So there's an anonymous person from Montreal, and they say, I'm a veteran experiencing signs of PTSD. While I await a mental health assessment, where can I learn more about treatments like cannabis?
Well, with cannabis, I think going online and reaching out to people like myself on Veteran Guerrilla Radio, and also Scott Casey and the crew on Military Minds, which is the biggest peer support-based network in the world dealing with veterans' PTSD. There are people that can point that individual in the right direction to start off on the right foot with it and not just dive into it.
Well, as you said, that's the key, because you can mess yourself up the first time and then you're scared off of it altogether, even if it could help you.
We have another one. Megan asks, what are the concerns for use of cannabis in veterans? Are there concerns?
Well, we just, it's funny with soldiers, they're like, before I used it, my first thought about marijuana is like, I got to put on some riot gear and run out some hippies or something. Like we all have this stigma. And there's been a horrible stigma towards cannabis for, the last century.
Right.
And you just really have to get around that. We have to break that stigma. That's one of the key things. What was the question again? I got a traumatic brain injury. I forget stuff.
It's what are the concerns with use of cannabis? Are there concerns as a veteran because maybe you are already on medications? Is there
conflict, worried about
are there
using
anything like that?
pharmaceuticals with that? I don't think so. I think there's enough leadership in the veteran community that are endorsing it and who have tried it, like myself using it, and then know it works. There is confidence that it's something that can help. It's just unfortunate that a great deal of the people that are needing this right now are still technically on paper still serving, and within that construct they can't try it. So their only option in that period is to go to the pharmaceuticals. And I'm not dissuading the pharmaceuticals necessarily, because some people it actually does work out.
Everyone's different. Aaron, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Tell the folks again, the show on Facebook?
Veteran Guerrilla Radio is our working group that we do all the outreach and updates on the lawsuit.
Awesome, excellent.
And thank you so much for serving our country as well.
It's my pleasure. I miss it.
Thanks for sharing. Listen, just a heads up, that wraps up this week. So thank you to Kirk Tousaw from the Tousaw Law Corporation joining us via Skype. Next week is our season finale.
Season finale. It's going to be jam-packed full of surprises, recaps.
Some
We're gonna have
special
some
guests,
fun.
exactly.
Maybe a dance-off.
Probably not a dance-off,
I
but
really want to do a dance-off.
Thursday at 4:20 as always for the season finale of THC Live. Until then, everyone have a great week, and we'll see you then.
Ciao.